What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Rock and Roll Gypsy Diaries. I'm your host, Andy Thunders, and I'm here with someone I'm more than overjoyed to have on this show, as I'm a big fan, as anybody who knows me as well. I've got Rob from the Taxpayers on today. How are you, man?
Hey Andy, I'm doing good. I'm doing great.
That's really good to
Here
hear.
we're doing this interview at night, which is my favorite time to do
Yes.
anything. I'm a night guy. It's 10:30 where I'm at. I think it's
Yeah, I
like
just woke
11:30
up
where
like
you're at,
four
huh?
hours ago. It's
Yeah.
11:30 about where I'm at. I work night shift, so
We're both night shift guys. We're night owls.
well, yeah, I'm an insomniac anyway. That's why I took a third shift job plus the
Mm-hmm.
extra pay.
Yep. I honestly, it's why I teach night classes. A lot of people are like, at the schools that I've worked at since I started teaching the night classes, they would say, if you want, we've got these morning classes available.
No.
I'm happy. I'm happy. Do what I
Yeah.
do.
Well,
Yep.
that's really cool because I mean, you know, I listen to your music sometimes when I'm stocking stuff at work,
Hmm.
on my way to work. I showed my wife your music because I knew she would love you guys because she actually sort of, I'll give her the credit of really turning me on to actually appreciating jazz because she
Hmm.
wanted to go see Postmodern Jukebox for her birthday. And I was able to get press passes and she was able to take photos. And that was a nice
Hmm.
moment. But, you know, I always tell them because, you got intense songs, you got soft songs. When I show them the intense stuff, I'm like, this guy's also a teacher. And they're just like, wow, that's really cool.
Like, oh
Like,
my God, I hope he doesn't shout at his students like
no, 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 no,
that.
no. But it shows that, the image of people like you and me has always been that we're sort of uneducated or
Mm,
violent or this or
yeah.
that. But the fact that you're able to be a teacher and, like I said, it said on Wikipedia, I think that you were a preschool teacher. I'm like,
Hmm.
that's really wholesome. I had more of that reaction.
Yeah,
I know what
all
it,
of my favorite punk musicians in particular have always been the type of folks that would like sort of challenge the expectation based on an abrasive sounding music.
Yellow Biafra is
Would
a
be
perfect example of that.
sure Jello Biafra, Bad Religion.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say that.
Milo from the Descendants.
Yes.
Here's this chemist, or here's this, here are these, very educated uh, folks who I don't know. I think that I think it's a misconception that a lot of people have that musicians whose music sounds otherwise a bit abrasive,
Yeah.
as you say, are less educated or something like that. And I actually find that to be the opposite case
Me too.
generally. Like even with many contemporary musicians, like many of my favorite musicians are some of the most brilliant people that I know, and not even just offhandedly brilliant, like just genuinely. Uh, Educated and contributing members of society, right?
Yes.
In a positive way. Um,
Absolutely.
I'm thinking of like uh, John from the Fleshies and um, Street Eaters. He's also a teacher. There's I actually know quite a few teacher punks that
Yeah.
exist. There was a zine that was created that was called I'll have to think of it a little bit later. But there was a series of interviews that were done with different punk teachers. It was amazing how many people that I never would have considered to be either college or elementary or high
Yeah.
school in some cases.
That's
Yeah,
funny you say
yeah,
that because around the time I first really started getting into punk in middle school, I had
yeah.
heard the Ramones and I knew they were popular with a lot of the hip skater kids that I kind of fell in between the burnouts, the rockers, the skaters, and the goths. So I didn't
Hmm.
have a niche, which kind of hurt me at first, but worked to my advantage later. Um, but I had a teacher and he taught world history. and he actually was, I think he was playing the Misfits. And I walked in one
Hmm.
morning, I'm like, that really sounds to me a lot like the Ramones. And he knew that I knew
Yeah.
about like Led Zeppelin and Kiss and the Beatles, but he knew that I
Yeah.
wasn't too much on the punk. But he responded very positively and said, you're right. They're actually from about the same time. And
Yeah.
that kind of, started the first link. And the next thing you know, I've got Nevermind the Bollocks and Stations of the Crass, and I was never the same again.
Yes.
So
Once we hear crass, our lives are forever
Sex
changed.
Pistols first. They
Yeah.
hit me like a ton of bricks because that was unlike anything I'd ever heard or been able to stomach before. And it was
Hmm.
something my parents hated for the first time. So I was like, yes. But
I was
then
aware of
Crass
the.
was just another level.
Yeah, well, sure. You kind of have to be. I don't know that I could have received crass like I needed to until until my mind was ready for it. I think I kind of
Yes.
needed to be prepared for it.
The
And you
Grateful Dead
also
was the same way
kind of
too.
have to be you kind of have to be a lyrics person for crass. I mean, you can just listen to them like they're a very aggressive sounding band, but
Yeah.
if you're the kind of person that just pours over lyrics and tries to take things out of what the words are.
Yeah.
I feel like you get a completely different thing from crass than what you hear if you're looking at the words. And they're definitely one of the bands that politically engaged me first
Absolutely.
early on.
I
Like
mean,
now, Sex Pistols, don't get me wrong, um, somewhat political band, but generally it's just kind of
it was
uh,
cash for chaos back then, as opposed to a real
chaos.
wholesome,
Yeah,
heartfelt movement,
yeah.
I should say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas Crass, there was a genuine uh,
Authenticity.
yearning for a different world, for a different world than the one that they lived in, and there was a template being offered for what a different world could look
Yes.
like. And
It
yeah,
wasn't, hey, let's get drunk and burn
yeah,
shit. It was, no, man,
right,
this shit's serious. Like,
right,
and I think that's where you start that, I think in a way that transition out of the, just chaos for the sake of it. And Crass was definitely more intellectualized, I'd say. For someone
yeah,
named Steve Ignorant, he's very not ignorant.
sure, yeah.
I mean,
And not to necessarily put down the Sex Pistols because I think they're very influential for a lot of people. I remember the first time that I ever heard them. I was my friend Matt, so the first punk band that I ever had. We were in junior high, and we didn't play any instruments, and he was like, we should start a band, and he had a Sex Pistols tape, and my understanding of what punk was Green Day.
yeah,
I'm 38, and so I was coming of age into music like a few years after Dookie would have kind of
yeah.
become a big thing,
And
and
I'm
so I was aware
30,
of like
so we're roughly around, we're not too far off.
yeah. Yeah, and so I was like, okay, it's like punk sounds like this. I had heard the Vandals. I had a friend who listened to the Vandals, and so I knew who they were.
Yeah.
But
It's
then my friend Matt gave me the Sex Pistols tape. He's like, listen to this, and I listened to it. And I was like, oh my god, this is awful. And I was like, if they can play music, we can do this. If they can do it, then if this is a band that people listen to, we can do this. This
yeah.
will be easy.
Like I said, I mean, the closest thing I could say that I had ever heard to any proper punk at
Yeah.
that age, and this is going to make a lot of people laugh, but
Hmm.
I like rock and roll. I don't discriminate between genres and stuff. I
Right.
don't share sentiments of certain scenes, but you know, um, Guns N' Roses, The Spaghetti Incident, I'd say was
Yeah.
my first real introduction to what proper punk was before I really understood. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
you've got them covering The Damned, Johnny Thunders. They did Black Leather by the Sex Pistols, which I was weirded out why that wasn't on Nevermind the Bollocks
Yeah.
until I found out later, and you do the history thing. But it had,
Huh.
Human Being by the Dolls, Raw Power by the Stooges. Those were the
Yeah.
first, because I was into And it's funny because there is a certain punk element to what Guns was doing musically at the time.
Right.
Especially it came from Duff. I find out years later, Duff was really a lot to do with that.
Yeah, it couldn't have been Axel.
No, well, Duff was a Seattle punk. He was in 10
Yeah.
Minute Warning with my friends Paul Soldier and Blaine Cook,
Yeah.
early on. So, I mean, he came from that kind of background into Guns N' Roses. And it's kind of interesting. When I read his book, I went back and I listened and I'm like, okay, I could see where, I don't like the machismo that Axel
Mhm.
brings out, but I can see what Duff's talking about
Yeah.
musically and stuff. You know what I mean? The
Yeah.
bass was in the center rather than
Yeah.
in the background. You know what I mean? Like old punk records and stuff like that.
Yeah.
If you take the machismo out of it, I could really get into it more these days. But
Yeah.
that kind of stuff doesn't sit well with me anymore. it,
Yeah. It's
it
a
never
different
did
world.
growing up, and I never
Yeah.
took it really that seriously. But when you
Mhm.
have kids and you have daughters and stuff, it takes
Right.
it to a whole nother plethora.
Sure. Yeah. It's yeah. I can imagine
I
thinking
can tell a
about.
difference if an artist is celebrating sex or if it's crossing that line.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
Band
Yeah. I can
chasing
imagine
stuff
having
had
a
more of
kid
a
would change that.
celebration. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? The 70s hard rock had a little bit more of a celebration, I think, than outright, what they had in the 80s.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting to think about how societal norms shift
Yeah.
within generations, and then also within some generations from decades ago. What was the norm was not necessarily what everyone was doing. Plenty of people were saying, "Hey, this is not what we should be all about right now."
Yeah.
But
And
you
even
know,
some of the bands don't play certain songs or anything
mhm,
anymore. Or they're like, yeah,
right?
there's a lot of stuff in the 80s that, was hyped up and stuff that we were even
Yeah,
aghast by or whatever.
yeah.
I mean, you had bands like Faster Pussycat in the 90s writing about serious subject matter, even though their scene was kind of fading. They went from, found your number on the bathroom wall to writing a song about, on Whip, there's a song called No Way Out, which, it's a story about an uncomfortable subject. And I'm just like, wow, like it's
Yeah.
not degrading or anything. It's just talking about something that's not, it has references to pedophilia and stuff like that, like bringing that to a subject matter, a public talking point, rather than, you know, you see what I mean? Like it's riveting, but they weren't doing it out of poor intent. You know what I mean? They were actually like, we need to write
Right.
about more serious subject matter
I see.
because,
So I don't know the song, but so they were kind of wanting
yeah, they
to
were bringing out
explore
topics about
difficult.
abortion and
Okay.
more of a worldview thing, more
Huh.
about bringing topics like that into it.
Yeah.
It's really weird, that era in the late 80s, early 90s, and that whole shift. I really, because I was born in 91, almost exactly a month before Nevermind hit
Hmm.
shelves. Um, Literally, I was born August 30th, that came out September 23rd. But in talking to a lot of people, it wasn't quite this just random overnight thing. Like the mythology has been prophesized in every, history of rock and roll about that era. A lot
Hmm.
of those bands in the 80s, before they were big in the 90s, were on college radio, the college indie thing. By the 90s, all those kids were out of college. And that makes more sense. But they were also like Soundgarden writing Big Dumb Sex. They loved all the 70s hard rock bands. They just took the machismo out,
Yeah.
and infused the punk, you know. And, but seeing that even a lot of the bands that were, I guess, part of that LA image of the sleazy whatever, they were writing more serious worldview stuff. Some of them were, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like, yeah, Poison was doing Unskinny Bop and stuff like that, but you had bands writing about, it was almost like, wow, that's almost punky in a way to
Right.
do that in that type of genre, to talk about those subjects. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. It's kind of relieving that some of those bands could come away from that and be like, no, that was wrong, and we've seen enough of the world to see a little bit more of what's actually happening. Let's write about that rather than
Yeah.
drink, party.
Yeah, there's kind of two responses for people who come from a different era in which societal values have shifted. The first is to be defensive and say, "Hey, it was a
Yeah,
different time. Fuck you." And then the second is to say, "I've
it was
learned
a
a lot
different
since
time, but it
then,
was still
and I don't necessarily still have that." Ideology or outlook. Like for example, Elvis Costello. I remember so one of his more famous songs. It uses um, kind of racy language, and the intent that he had behind writing it was, it was good intent. It was a political song, but very recently he's been like challenged on it, and he said, you know what, honestly, if I were to write it these days, I probably wouldn't write it quite the same way.
yeah.
I don't think, I think the way in which I wrote it kind of became a distraction, and could have hurt some people, and the intent was not to hurt people. The intent was
Yeah.
to, raise uh, you know, either raise
Awareness.
awareness about an issue, or to kind of challenge presuppositions about things.
Yeah.
And he said, honestly, like when we play that song now, I self censor it. Like I change the words because I wrote the song, so I don't consider it censorship. But he's like, because I wrote it, I'm therefore able to evolve it. And
Yeah.
nowadays, I evolve it in the following way. And I thought that was a really interesting way of thinking about, going from a time in which it would have been acceptable to say one thing, and now it's no longer. You could say anything, I guess, but
Well, I think it also
he's at
has
least
to do.
thoughtful enough to be aware of
Yeah.
the power of words.
Well,
So
especially with the context of time. As
yeah,
time has gone on and you see on both sides, you see people who react to it and understand exactly where you come from. But then
yeah,
you have it weaponized by, the people who completely misinterpret it. And given the
yeah,
context of the times, I think that's pretty wholesome. And of course, he's
yeah,
probably going to get flack for it. But at the end of the
sure,
day, if he's making that decision on his own as the songwriter, he has
yeah.
every right to do that.
No, exactly. Yeah, it's
If John
you know,
Lennon were
yeah,
alive, I'm sure he'd say there's some songs that he wrote that he wouldn't have reprint anymore, not because he
sure.
disagrees with the message now, but because of the way it could be interpreted.
Yeah.
You know what I
I have
mean?
that myself with several things that I've written over the years. Like the some of the early songs that I wrote were intentionally provocative in a way that was it didn't serve anything. Like I thought it was artsy to be offensive, and
Yeah.
turns out it's only artsy if you have something to say.
Yeah.
And I didn't have anything to say. I was just being offensive for the sake of being offensive, and I wouldn't do it that way
You went through your
anymore.
G.G. Allen period, I guess,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
a
yeah,
lot more of a
exactly.
tame way, I'm
Yeah,
sure. But
yeah,
that
yeah. But
kind of
same
ideology.
idea. Yeah, same idea. It's like, you either evolve or you don't evolve. Is
Exactly.
at the end of the day, it's with everything. You're either stuck in your ways and unwilling to see other points of view and other ways of doing things, or you're not. And so, like,
And that hinders
yeah,
progress in an ever-changing world, unfortunately.
yeah, 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 yeah. You have to be open to new ways of thinking, and new and the world's constantly shifting.
Yeah.
Um, Norms are shifting, and things that are considered acceptable are shifting. And honestly, like, there's a big debate that is happening right now about, are people too easily offended on the one hand, or is it appropriate? Are they finally our voices finally being heard that were historically marginalized, and now those voices are finally able to be heard. And I don't know, it's probably somewhere in between those two things,
It
where
usually is, but the problem
yeah,
is that even in between's a bad place to be.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
unfortunately, it's like that Buffalo Springfield song, and I've been quoting this for the last couple of years. Nobody's right if everybody's wrong.
yeah,
And I don't
yeah,
think anybody has the right idea necessarily about everything that's going on, no matter how much they claim to
sure.
be an expert. And I'm not just
And
talking about, people or scientists. I'm just saying everybody. Nobody has an exact idea of what's going on. And it's
yeah,
just,
many people are very have absolute certitude in their
yes.
righteousness, and when you have absolute certainty in your beliefs, or you're so righteous that everyone else is wrong, I'm right, but everyone else is wrong,
You're dancing
then
on
that's
us.
not a good place to be. That's not a good
No,
place to be. You get
especially with the climate and the rest of the world. I mean, I had Scoop from Doom on here last week, and he's over in England, and he said I won't get political because we'd be here for 3 hours. And I'm like, I'm the same way, but he's like,
yeah,
I basically live in a post-Brexit hellhole.
yeah,
And
yeah,
everything else that's going on elsewhere now too is just like, oh my God. I've literally seen, I feel like we're living in similar times to the 60s and 70s
yeah,
with like the 80s kind of political climate to a certain degree, it seems like
yeah.
we're having a complete, it's the fervor
Mhm.
is almost exactly the same. The only reason it seems more intense is because we have more cameras now.
Yeah, it's amplified by media being ever
Exactly.
present and the internet and so forth. Yeah, I think that that is true. It is also. I think it's also like it can be simultaneously true that things are as bad as they've ever been. They're no worse than
Yeah.
they've ever been, but also that they are uniquely bad right
Yes.
now, and it's a unique type of uprising, maybe not even uprising, of conflict, that of worldwide conflict,
Yeah.
simply because of the way in which communication happens right now. Like, look at us, we're on Zoom right now, and the way in which people consume news and communicate with each other in a COVID world, and in a post internet world. Um, like, if we talk about, like, so the fellow that you were just mentioning, saying that he's in a post Brexit hellhole. So, as we're having this discussion, Russia is invading Ukraine
Yeah.
right now, and
Mm-hmm.
my wife and I were just talking about this. She got home from work, like, between the time that I got off from my classes and I sat down with you here, and we were just talking while we were eating some food about how the Ukraine thing has evolved into what it is now, which is just open warfare.
Yeah.
It went from being a many people, including myself, saying it's a flex. He's trying to get something, like Putin's trying to get something right now, and it's a
He
flex. It's
always
probably
is.
nothing will happen. To being just no, never mind. Actually, he wants war, and we I've talked a lot about Putin in the past 5 years because I made a record. the I did a thing called Anxiety Cat, is a project I did, which has been like tracing um, the roots of power structures, and I did a whole record about Putin and his rise to power, and the inter the politics of the Putin era of Russian politics, and I interviewed a bunch of Russians about it, and I was we were talking about, like, between Ukraine, Brexit, um, the rise of disinformation, like, globally,
Yes.
but
Yes.
in terms of in the United States of America, people are like, how could something like QAnon happen? It's so batshit crazy, and it turns out, like, this has all been this really savvy, maniacal plan, evil
Yeah,
plan, but it's been very savvy and it's been a long time coming. And what it seems like was
if you look
realized
back in
pretty
history,
early on was you can manipulate people very, very, very easily in the present era
yes,
using the tools of misinformation. Like people, you read something and you take it for fact unless you
yep. It
are,
doesn't
even
matter
if
how
you have,
many times it's flagged
yeah,
that, oh, this was false and here's the sources. It doesn't matter. You keep
yeah.
that same stuff every day. It doesn't matter. That's
So
implanted.
Brexit wouldn't have happened without Putin. Trump wouldn't have happened without Putin. Certainly, like any of the present things like Ukraine or you know in many European countries, like for example, the rise of the far right in Germany again wouldn't have
Yeah,
happened without Putin. A lot of this stuff is directly coming from St. Petersburg, from the Internet Research Agency. It's what they call it. It's this building in St. Petersburg, Russia, where they have a branch of the Russian government who are hackers, and they sit down and they're just trolls
yeah,
online, and they seed weird things like QAnon stuff, and they
reeval.
encourage Brexit being a good idea. And now you interview even people who voted for Brexit. Like if you listen to the BBC, they'll interview people who voted for Brexit, and they're like, I don't know what I was thinking. I was fucked by that. Like I'm a farmer, and now I'm not making any money. Like we have no trade with any other
For
places that we
someone
used to have
like
trade with.
me, it
It's
really
it's far
sucks.
worse. You
And
know.
I mean, I'm not trying to say that, oh, poor me, but I can't, it's hard. I can't order almost anything from England right now because the cost of their shipping now has
Yeah.
gone through the roof. It costs more to ship an LP than it does to actually buy the damn thing.
Well, and if you zoom out and you wonder why all this stuff is happening, it starts to make sense. And what's
Yeah,
happening is like basically you have somebody who wants an empire that is larger than the current empire, that wants the reunification of the Soviet Union. And the only way to make that happen is to divide the current power structure so that they're powerless. You divide the European Union. You make them. You kind of
because he
you know
knows if
you
they're all
divide
united,
America.
there's no way that he could
Yeah.
do something like that.
Hmm.
We've been
Yeah.
down
So
that road.
without England as a part of the EU, without America, without the United States of America having some semblance of social cohesion, which, to be fair, we haven't had for a long time, but
Yeah,
it
he
has
just
been
exasperated
exacerbated it.
us.
Yeah, yeah. And so it was a really savvy move that took maybe 15-20 years to do, but basically it was just kind of poking these different parts of society to see how you could splinter it. And then once it was all splintered and everyone was reeling from their own problems in a COVID world, now's a good time for us to actually take Ukraine,
Yeah.
so yeah. So
Ugh.
it's kind of fascinating to think about how it is that these all of these powers that be exert their influence on each other, and then the rest of us are just kind of reacting. We're just reacting to the things that happen, or we're just saying la 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 la, it's not happening, I'm going to watch
Yeah.
Netflix right now.
Well, playing the ignorance card. I mean,
Yeah, and then you can't even like even if you try to stay engaged 24/7 to this kind of stuff and stay up on top of it, there's any number of things. No person could possibly be engaged with all of it at once. You want to stay on
exactly.
top of like racial justice issues or gender identity issues or international politics. You kind of like you've only got so much time in the day to be
Yeah.
able to lock into it. So people just get overwhelmed and they
Yeah.
don't know how to engage with any of it. And
I
I
just
think
take
that
it
that's
all
by
from a
design.
human perspective instead of a political.
Yeah.
I try to look at the different angles,
Yeah.
even ones I don't agree with, because the thing that people don't realize is if you talk with people who agree with everything you agree with, you'll never
Yeah.
grow. You'll never be able to
Right.
see another side that might make you be able to find a better way, or you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that whole thing is very crucial, which our government lacks. But I just look at it from a human perspective rather than try to
Hmm.
consider the political
Yeah.
things in it, because I'm like, at the end of the day, the politics don't fucking matter. It's,
Yeah.
is it right or is it
It's
wrong?
people.
Is
Yeah,
it
you know
right or wrong?
exactly.
At the end
I
of the
think
day,
like it feels so everything feels so overwhelming that it can be hard to step back and say, okay, where can hope be found? And where hope is found, it's in talking to your fellow humans,
yes,
and it's in like walking over to your neighbor's house and like knocking on their door and giving them a fucking pie or something like that.
yeah,
Like it's so easy to feel disconnected because of the internet and because of disinformation and all that kind of stuff, and
and
feel
the
like it's also
division
overwhelming.
that
But then
that
all you gotta do is
causes.
talk to somebody, talk
Yeah,
to a human being, and you're like, oh, we're all just humans. It's fine. We
yeah,
just need to communicate with each other a little bit more.
that's
Not,
that's the whole thing. You'll find that if you just don't, I find that if I just don't talk about politics or anything like that, really, you have no problems.
yeah,
And it's not like I'm ignoring the problem at hand. I'm well aware of what's going on. It's just at the end of the day, with everything that's going on, it's not worth creating more enemies for myself in a way. You know what I mean?
it's a great point, and I think it's one that especially people of our generation and younger miss, which is that even people we disagree with on a political basis, ideological basis, even like a religion or spiritual basis,
Yeah,
there's plenty that we have in common, and
exactly.
there's plenty we can like each other over. And just because I very, very disagree with a person on this one issue doesn't mean I can't love them as a
Exactly.
human, and it doesn't mean that I can't find common values. And if all we're ever doing is we're saying "fuck you, you're wrong," then nothing's going to ever get solved from that.
Yeah,
We're just going to lose our humanity in the process. We need to find ways that we have things in common. We need to find our shared humanity in order to survive the present modern era. In order to survive the world that we live in, we need to concentrate on what we share and not where we differ.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And the nice thing is that it probably gives you a lot of material to draw from to write for in the taxpayers, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah, I mean it's simultaneously easier than ever to write about contemporary issues and more overwhelming than ever because it's ever present. It's
Yes.
so
Like I
I don't
said,
know. Yeah.
I wasn't alive at the time, but the way people talk about the Cold War, that's the kind of thing I'm feeling right now with what's
Yeah.
going on currently, as of like what, yesterday?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's been a long time. I mean, even during the Trump years, it felt a lot like that. It felt like there was a
Oh
lot
yeah.
of soft.
Trump reminded me of Nixon. A
Yeah. Yeah.
lot of Nixon.
Yeah. Yeah. Even more. Bit more bombastic, if it can be said.
Yeah. But he
But
created that same kind of paranoid
hmm
atmosphere and stuff because I've got an affinity for the 70s because I feel like it's been overshadowed by how great the 60s ended
hmm
and the historical rose tinted glasses, if you look at it that way, because there's a lot
hmm
of different angles to look at that. And how great the 80s started in hindsight in pop culture. I feel like the 70s got overshadowed. So I've
yeah.
done a lot, but I'm watching stuff, watching Nixon speeches where he's talking about the silent majority. And I'm like, oh my God, that's Trump saying, I love the uneducated,
Yeah. Yeah.
and make
There's
America great again slogan that he actually legally copyrighted in like 2013 or 2014
hmm
came from an old Reagan speech. I'm like,
yeah.
talk
Sure.
about going backwards.
There's echoes of history constantly. It's you
And
know
I'm not saying it as a, and just for the record, watching the speeches and watching the history on Nixon, it was you you have to be blind and deaf and dumb to be able to sit there and watch an old Nixon speech, about the silent majority and not see the parallels, plain as day. You know what I mean?
What's funny about Nixon is I remember always, watching the old videos of him at the time and thinking, how do you not just automatically know this guy's a crook?
Yeah,
How do you not
exactly.
automatically know that this guy's super corrupt? There's no way that could happen in the modern era. And then the most egregious example to
Happens
prove me
right
wrong
there.
comes up, and Trump gets elected, and I'm like, my God, how do you not see the guy for what he is? Just
Call the personality.
a
The
guy
call the
who is a
personality.
grifter. He's just an egotistical grifter who's out to make a buck and serve his power trip, his ego. Um, and
He
so
found
I
the
guess
divide and he exacerbated it.
yeah, people are easily swayed by
Emotion.
anger. Yeah, yeah, especially
That's
the
what he
emotion of
did.
anger and fear. If you
That's
can
what he
tap
did.
into people's anger and fear, then they'll follow you anywhere. Um,
Yep. We've seen that several different times in history in
mm,
many different places.
yeah.
And it's never worked out good.
Yeah, the question is how do you move beyond that? Because it's just this, it almost feels like it's this constant cycle of failure.
Yeah.
And more people want peace than want violence. More people want to achieve um, social cohesion than want to achieve division.
Yeah.
And how do you make that stick is the question. That's the big question, and I
Because
don't have an
everybody
answer for
says
it.
it's a Star Trekian dream that we're just naturally this way. And I'm like, if more people want the opposite of what's
Yeah.
happening, and we're not naturally like this, we've been conditioned like this.
I don't think it's utopian to say that a different way
And
is
I agree.
possible.
I
Like it's
agree.
yeah,
But that's
it's
what the
it's
naysayers always say.
sure, sure.
I'm like,
It,
why
it,
can't we
it's
just know better?
it's not utopian. It's just that there is the people that hold the mechanisms of power um, are willing to do horrific things to maintain that power, and it becomes very hard as as the otherwise peace loving majority of humans to know how to respond to a military intervention to like, so everyone in Ukraine right now is thinking like, my God,
I've
I
seen
can
the
be a
pictures. It's
pacifist all I want, but the tanks are rolling in here and they're bombing Kiev right now,
yeah.
and what do? We flee or we fight in an insurgency and likely we get killed. What are the options? And
Yeah.
so like eh, I don't know. I don't know what the solution is. I have some ideas for how we could do it better, but I don't know how you fight an army like
I don't know, man.
without violence, and I'm not advocating for violence. I think that that's like too many
Yeah.
people, especially radicals that I otherwise agree with mostly, like especially anarchists
Yes.
and many progressives are, I think, too quick to be willing to say that they would pick up arms against the state or pick up
I agree.
arms against things, and I just don't think you win these ongoing cycles of violence with more violence. We need to find a way to break the cycle, and you don't break the cycle with a gun. You
You
don't
lose all
break it with
credibility almost in a
yeah,
way once you do that. It's
exactly,
really
exactly,
unfortunate because I get the frustration of, well, what else are we supposed to do? I
yeah,
get it, but it's still, I don't abide by that either. So
yeah,
I'm completely with you on that. I
yeah.
tell people my way
Yeah.
of anarchism is not throwing a bomb through a Starbucks window.
Yeah,
That's
sure, sure, sure. That
antithesis.
it can be if it's looked at from um if you're looking at it from like a true democracy where every person has a say and there is mutual solidarity with all people in society regardless of race, creed, background, social status, then
Yeah.
how can you argue with that? But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's so funny. Like whenever I feel like whenever I've done interviews like what we're doing right now, it's always like on the dawn of some military intervention that's going on. Like the last time I did this, it was there was um I was talking wow, I don't even remember what the conflict was. There was some sort of conflict. We were talking about the story of how Gaddafi came to power in
Yeah.
Libya, and this wasn't like when the Libyan um, the overthrow of Gaddafi happened, but we were
Yeah.
talking about it at the same time. We had a lot of echoes of the same conversation. I guess that's just how the world works, though. There's always a conflict going on
Yeah.
somewhere in the world. It's like never. It's a never-ending battle. And like here we are, just trying to, we're
Make sense of it.
just trying to like, you got your kids, you're just trying to raise your kids. I'm just trying to, be a teacher and play music. Your average person's just trying to garden
Yeah.
and we got these fucking assholes like goddamn Putin trying to fucking start wars. My
And that's
God.
exactly how I feel. Like, that's great that you have your reasons, but what the
Yeah.
fuck does that have to do with me?
What about the rest of us? I tell you what, though, I one great thing about reputable news and about like open media is hearing the human stories during times of conflict like this. Like I don't know if you listening to the radio today at all, but I think it was on the BBC or maybe it was NPR, one of those kind of radio stations I was listening to. I was doing some dishes, and they interviewed this Ukrainian woman a week ago, and then they did a follow up with her today. And a week ago, they interviewed her and they said, "Hey, like how are you preparing? You got kids. How are you preparing for this potential Russian invasion?" And she said, "My daughter wants a guinea pig." And I keep telling her like we can't get a guinea pig in case we need to flee. We can't take a guinea pig with us. What are we
Yeah.
gonna do? And then they did a follow up with her this week, well today, and they said, "How are you doing? Are you okay?" And she says, "Well, we got the guinea pig." and she
Wow,
says,
that's
and
not what
she
I
says,
was expecting.
and she says, "I'm so glad we got the guinea pig because we're now having to flee, and my daughter has this pet to take care of, and it takes her mind off of like this
Yeah,
shit that's happening, and so like they talked about like the name of the guinea pig. The name escapes me. It was a Ukrainian name that
yeah.
I don't recall off the top of my head, but they talked about like her daughter naming the guinea pig and
That's
her
really,
having to take care of it.
I mean, the
Yeah.
tragedy of what's going on makes me sad, but that kind of human, I don't know,
Right.
beacon makes me smile and gives me a little bit of a warm feeling through it all.
Exactly. It's so easy to dehumanize groups of people and nations of people, and even if you're not trying to dehumanize, even if you're trying to sympathize with
It can
war-torn
still be that
places,
way. Yeah.
you feel separate from it. You feel like it's just something that is a world away. But then it's those kinds of things that you're like, oh, this is no different from me or my brother, my sister, my
Yeah.
neighbor. They're just like trying to get a guinea pig for their fucking daughter. And
And this
like,
asshole's just tried to invade their
uh,
country.
yeah, yeah. And she's like, and the daughter's just like, well, I got my guinea pig, so I'm happy.
Oh man.
So, you know what's interesting though? I actually had this conversation. So I teach. I was telling you, I teach night classes. I teach adults these days. I don't teach preschool anymore. Now I teach adult like GED and ESL. I teach adult education,
That's
and
cool.
um, and I have for my ESL class, my ELL English language learners. It's people from like all over the world, and I got people from tons of different countries, like you know, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Somalia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Thailand, like just any number of places, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. And many of these places are currently war torn. They're places
Yeah.
of civil war and things like that. And so we talk in class for the first half. We have a discussion, and I'll give like a discussion topic, and it'll be a chance for them to just practice speaking in English or writing in English. And
Yeah.
we will often talk about, like, so last week the discussion topic was, tell us a story about your childhood. Like, think of something that happened when you were a kid and tell us a story about that. And so different people will tell stories, and many of them told stories of growing up with the Civil War around them and them not being aware of it. This was the interesting part. It, like, they were like, I loved my childhood, and there was a civil war going on in my country, but I wasn't aware of it. Like, I was aware of my friends, and I was aware of like what I did on the day to day. We had a cat, and I would go and I would feed the cat, and we would go feed the chickens, and I would go like meet up with my friends, and we would play. And a lot of people had similar like stories, and what we talked about was it's really interesting to think just how resilient not just
Children are.
kids, yeah, kids are so resilient, and humans in general are super resilient in times of crisis.
Yeah.
And we can take any shit circumstances and concentrate on our guinea pig, you know?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah,
And I think that, when COVID happened and everybody was kind of stuck indoors, we had a lot of creativity and a lot of good music that came out
yeah.
during that time. Um,
Right. People are making the best of bad situations, and they've been doing that for millennia.
that's
And
roughly
I,
the time I switched over to DJing and stuff and doing this as opposed to just, writing articles because I'm like, nobody reads anymore. I got to take this to the people, you know?
right, right. So you took that moment to say like, now's the time for me to do a change in my life
Yeah.
of some
Well,
way.
we actually had a situation where we had to move. I got laid off at the right time. So I had
Yeah,
the time and the money to concentrate on some art at the time,
yeah.
So I mean, you
I've
know,
heard a lot of stories like that where people have utilized the hard parts of the pandemic to make a change in their life for the better. You know, a
yeah.
lot of people have done that, which is awesome. There's all this talk of people are so worried about the Great Resignation, everybody quitting their jobs, and I think it's a great thing.
Yeah.
Like what you like. Number one, people are demanding what you know better pay, like they
Yeah.
should have been expected to do in the first place, or they're not doing something that makes them miserable. And why did we decide that society has to function by people doing things that make them miserable? Like
Yeah.
there's no rule or written law that says that people should be miserable for society to work. In fact, probably society functions a little bit better when people are doing something they like. And so,
In
you know,
fact, I mean, like I said, I work as a stockman at a very well-known, American retail store.
hmm
And I mean, at least the one I work at, I'm actually shocked at how, progressive they've actually been with all this
yeah,
because they've always had a bad reputation. But I make decent money. I'm treated with respect,
yeah,
and, you know, I let them know I was autistic. And, I said, I found some, I did a Google search and I thought maybe this would help you guys, because they've always been kind. It's
yeah.
unlike any other work environment I've been in. It's not so cutthroat and cold,
They
you
were
know.
receptive to the things that you brought to them, that you were like,
Yes,
look,
they were like, thank you
here's
so
what I need.
much. This
Yeah,
helps in so many ways besides just, this particular circumstance. And I want you to know we
yeah,
really truly do appreciate everything you do. Like
that's
that
cool.
was a direct quote from one of my supervisors. So I mean,
Well, there you go. Yeah,
in
I
some
mean,
ways, some businesses are like, we really have no chance of getting away with this. We better start hopping on board. You know what I
we
mean?
better start acting right, or the ones that are awesome are now we know which ones are great and which ones suck.
Mhm.
Like I think I've heard some positive stories behind some of the larger companies. I know people who work for example, Trader Joe's and Costco, who generally treat their workers pretty well. Like Trader Joe's gives pretty robust benefits
Yeah.
to their employees. They pay a good wage.
I have something called
Costco's kind
protected
of same
paid
thing.
time off
Really?
because their point system was so rigid and so
Yeah.
minimal that they in turn decided, with everything going on, they created what's called protected paid time off, which
Yeah.
accumulates a little bit faster than your paid time off. But essentially, in the event of an emergency where you've got too many points, but there's no way you can physically make it into work, you'll
Yeah.
still get paid and you won't get pointed.
Interesting. Well, I'll tell you this much: it has not translated all of these societal changes around work have not translated into teachers being paid any better.
No, and that's insane to me.
I live in Saint I live so I live in Minneapolis now. We moved. I lived in New Orleans for 10 years. We
Yeah,
moved like last year. Speaking of like mixing things up, we had been ready to make a change pre-pandemic for a while, and we finally kind of made a change. But I teach in for St. Paul Public Schools, and both the Minneapolis public school system and the St. Paul public school system, just as of a couple days ago, voted to authorize a strike. And so there's going to be a teacher strike in both of the Twin Cities, the biggest cities in Minnesota, at like the same time. And unless the demands are met, which the demands are pretty pretty basic. It's like people want like a cohesive COVID policy that makes sense to so that like parents and teachers know what to expect when there's
yeah,
an outbreak. They want more than minimum wage for the part-time assistant teachers and the support staff and things like that who are making less than McDonald's employees are making.
yeah.
Just kind of like basic human rights things that they're asking for, and so it's weird. Like I kind of feel like teaching is the very last profession to get the benefits of any positive work changes, because
That's
people are like,
crazy.
people are teachers because they want to be teachers, right? They'll be fine. They don't need
Who
they don't
needs
need
to
a
pay their bills?
who needs a they don't they're fine. They're fine
Who needs
making
to pay their bills
10
and have
grand a
a nice,
year.
comfy life?
Yeah, so I don't know. We'll see how that goes. It should be interesting. They're in like a what they call a cool down period,
Gotcha.
where they like you authorize a strike vote, and then there's a 10-day cool down period where they like negotiate more with the school district, and you know, if after that 10 days nothing comes to fruition, then there's going to
Yeah.
be a strike. So
Well, I wish you all the
interesting.
best.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we'll see how it
I mean,
goes.
teachers, my God, I mean, especially ones like you know, you deserve your fair lot. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
More,
I
I,
like I don't work as hard as the support staff for, like, for example, the like special education paraprofessionals that are they're the ones that get paid minimum wage right now, and that like they work harder than any person that I know, and they're working, you know, 80 hours a week,
gee,
more than they get paid for, and they spend one-on-one time
yeah,
with kids more than any administrator that's pulling in hundreds of thousands of dollars a year,
that's
who's never
insane.
spent time in a classroom, gets. And these are the people who are, you know, the ones that are making minimum wage, that, so like I do
I had heard about that
Yeah.
situation, but thanks for fully explaining that to me from a perspective where you actually know what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, it's to tie the taxpayers into it. This is what Kevin, he's the trumpet player for the taxpayers. He's a paraprofessional in for special education, and
Oh, wow.
he lives in Detroit. And so what he does, his job entails uh, he'll work one on one with a kid with very severe needs, like for example, who needs to be fed intravenously through a
Okay.
tube, or has medications that need to be administered via syringe or via
Oh, wow.
any number of things. Like he has to, change diapers in some cases,
Yeah.
and so it's a very very severe needs, and he'll work one on one with these kinds of students, or severe emotional uh,
Yeah.
issues in which a kid is very violent because of either psychiatric issues or home issues, and so he
Yeah.
works one on one with those kids, and he's just about the biggest sweetheart and the best cut out for this type of job of anyone that I know. But people like him need to be getting paid better,
I,
because
I,
he's
I,
doing like saint work. He's
yeah.
doing the work of a saint, and
Yeah.
not being treated like a saint by
No,
society.
it's shocking to me that someone doing that amount of, expect that's so wholesome what he's doing, and he's
Yeah,
just like, yeah, you don't matter. Like,
yeah, yeah. It's a shame, but who knows? We could see a big shift in how workers are treated in general. We'll see how it shakes out in the
yeah, they
long
always say
term.
it gets worse before it gets better.
Yeah. It feels like things are changing right now, but I've said that before in my life and I've been wrong.
Yeah.
So I don't want to
Well, you're saying it feels
yeah.
like, you're not saying they are, so
Yeah.
that's a
It
fair.
felt like we were on the cusp of change when the taxpayers were starting playing. Like, so we started playing in 2007, and
Okay. Yeah.
this was right before Obama got elected. This was on the tail end of the Bush years, in which there were, like, I remember going to anti-war marches for anti-Iraq war marches and stuff like
Yeah.
that, and it felt like we were on the precipice of change, and here was this man who was running for president on hope, and it was like, America's gonna have the first black president. Oh my God, he got elected.
I was in
And it
high
really
school
felt
still when that happened. Yeah, I can
it it,
remember all that.
it felt like everything was going to change,
Yeah,
and some things did, but for the most part things
they
stayed the
did.
same,
Yeah.
and so this big monster of the world. It's hard to it's hard for things to change on a major scale, but then again, maybe they do, because I mean, look at how the internet changed everything in such a
Yeah,
quick amount of time.
very quick. I mean, I remember, being a young kid with, you know, Windows 98 and dial up, but it was still so very limited.
And not everyone had it at that time. Like,
At the
not
time,
everyone was getting online and talking to each other
exactly.
immediately,
You didn't have
looking up any
YouTube, you
info.
didn't have half the crap that you have,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and then from then to 10 years later, we look
By
at,
the time I
you know,
graduated, it
these
was
things,
insane. Yeah.
you know, once
By the
those
time
things
I
started taking
graduated,
off.
it was insane. You know, MySpace was replaced by Facebook. And
Hmm.
that, to me, when Facebook started to become the norm of what everybody used for social media,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this is the next step until the next new cool one comes out. I was
Yeah.
shocked when Facebook never went away.
Yeah, me too.
Because I remember
I've been
Zanga
calling the
before
demise of
MySpace.
Facebook for years as well.
Yeah.
It is kind of surprising that it's stuck around so long. I don't really understand why some things seem to fail more quickly than others. Like, to me, Facebook, it was kind of like a very clunky, poorly designed interface. I could, even before it became clear that there were privacy issues and weird, like, the
I was just
disinformation
told it
stuff that
was
we were
a
talking
thing for
about.
college kids, and I
Yeah,
wasn't in college, so I didn't bother for a bit until,
right.
everyone I knew practically moved on over to there. I was like, okay, you know.
Yeah. Now they're changing their name to Meta. Now they're going to be Meta because the term Facebook is poison, and they're experimenting with AI robots and all kinds of crazy things.
Yeah, it's funny because
Brave new world.
yeah, I was gonna say I've just been watching documentaries on Frontline about um, stuff involving the Wall Street crash and
Mhm.
all the NSA stuff that started happening after 9/11 and stuff like that, and how they did it. And some of that, I recognize the term meta in the way that Facebook is using it. It comes from that program.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. When I was talking to Noah last night on the phone, he was telling me about the have you ever done the virtual reality, like the Oculus thing
Oh, but my son
before?
has. Had video games and stuff on that.
Yeah, I've never done it either actually, but Noah has, and he was telling me about how it you completely feel utterly immersed in a completely separate world, and he
I
said
can
it's
believe
quite
that because my
disconcerting.
son was just like, he actually said the first like 2 weeks he had gotten it, he said it made his head hurt and his eyes hurt. And like, he literally, like, he would play it all day long, on like weekends or whatever. He'd have it on and he'd just be jumping around, talking to, completely immersed. Like,
Yeah, it gives credence to this simulation theory of
right?
reality. Of you know, it's not that far of a jump to imagine that it would be feasible to artificially create a reality that looks a lot like what we consider to be reality.
Yeah.
The idea is a little scary. I'm not saying that that's the case, but
Yeah,
it's
I
it's
know.
it's it's not so far fetched when you look at
No, it's
things like
not.
Oculus Rift or Oculus Rift or whatever it is called, the Oculus virtual reality kind of stuff.
It's a weird
Yeah,
time to be alive. That's all
yeah,
I could say.
yeah,
I thought the late 90s was a weird era to be alive. Yeah.
yeah,
That
yeah,
whole weird thing. Um,
yeah.
so I mean, with the taxpayers, you started in 2007 on the cusp
Hmm.
of, change. Um, as far as I could tell, your first record was put out in 2009.
Yeah, so we did. Let me think. Uh,
A rhythm and a cage.
Exhilarating News was the first like official like
Oh,
band
okay.
record that we put out, and I think that was actually 2007-ish, 2008 maybe. And then we did Rhythm in the Cages in like 2008, 2009. And then the one after that was To Risk So Much for One Damn Meal, which was like
I'm
20,
torn between that
2009,
record
2010.
and the God Forgive These Bastards is my favorite of yours.
Right, that one was 2012 was the Henry Turner one. God Forgive These Bastards. Yeah.
I have the book and I've got To Risk So Much for One Damn Meal and the God Forgive These Bastards. I've got those on cassette.
Cool. One of the
Complete
few people
camera
there's
shout.
not a lot of those cassettes that are kicking around anymore.
Yeah,
Somebody
and
sent me
that's
like an
kind of why
eBay
I
link to
grab
some
them.
crazy amount of money that someone was charging for one of those tapes. And I was like, I gotta get one of those tapes.
They're like,
I don't have one.
I think I paid $10 a piece for them on Punk with
Nice.
Camera.
Nice.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
Brandon re-released them for us not too long ago, which we really appreciated because I
I
never would have done
appreciate
it
it
without
too.
him. Yeah.
Absolutely. I got the cassette tape patch that he has in your shop
Nice.
along with it. Um, but that was the first format I listened to, and I just feel like,
That's
well,
right here.
nice. Yeah, exactly. I've got that badge. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Nice.
He but the cassette tape format isn't my favorite. Vinyl is, but there's a special spot for cassette tapes because it was the first
Yeah.
format I owned, music on. And I don't know, there's something about the fact that it's analog and not a lot of people are
Yeah.
going to grab it. So I mean, it's going to be a cool thing to have. Like, yeah, this is a cassette tape.
It's cool. I like it too. It's obviously it's got its flaws, like
Yeah,
any media does. Any form of media has its
but I
flaws.
think
Like,
the
but
analog
it's
sound,
cool.
I feel like I hear more stuff, like more of a, I don't know how to put it, a well-rounded sound.
It's warm. It's more
Yes.
compressed, and so it's got a nice warm kind of fuzzy sound to it, which
But I
I
feel like
like
even though
personally.
it's not compressed in a bad way. I can hear
Right.
things a bit more instruments come more alive.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the streaming
No,
version.
I agree. I grew up on cassettes as well, uh, and CDs are I don't I think of all mediums, my personal opinion is I think the worst sounding is CDs. I think the second worst sounding is digital, like MP3 and waves,
I would
and
agree with
then
you
and then
100%.
yeah, and I think like my personal favorite sound is if you get a good speakers. I think of a vinyl record. There's that's the
Yes.
best, but it's really hard to find a halfway decent record player that can
Yeah,
make
yeah.
it sound okay. And the same is true with tape players too. But the cool thing about tape players is you can take them anywhere and they're kind of indestructible.
Yeah.
Unless you get the tape caught in something, but you
Mhm.
can't take like a big record with you and put it
No,
on the back of your bike and bike around with your
no.
record player going. But I do that all the time with my little cassette player. Like I have one of these rectangular ones that you put the tape in and you press play. I just throw it in my bike basket and I'll bike around, I'll listen to tapes. And
Yeah,
you
that's
can't do that
cool.
with a CD, you can't do that with a
No,
record,
no,
you know.
it would skip the holy hell.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Exactly.
you know, and I've actually got, because of that problem and being working class, yes, I use that term here.
Yeah.
Um, I have a turntable and a cassette, I've got a little cassette Walkman that I could plug a USB directly into. But when I
Right.
do it from the tape player itself, the quality is not great. It's too low on volume. So what I do is I actually run it auxiliary into my record player that has the USB thumb drive insert.
To give
And
it the tape sound. Yeah,
so I can literally
yeah,
play the tape
that's
through those
smart.
speakers and record it on the record player, which gives a better sound and a better quality. But I can
Right.
also do that with vinyl, and even though when I'm listening to it like that, I could take it into my car. I'm rebuilding a 67 Volkswagen with a buddy of mine, and it's going to have a CD player with the USB. So I can actually have the closest thing you can have to analog in a digital world.
Yeah.
But I like doing that because I prefer to buy a physical product than pay for something that doesn't technically exist. And I like the
Yeah.
analog. It's a better way,
It's got a nice sound. Yeah, it's a hard
better than taking a
bridge
digital
to gap.
source into a digital thing. It's actually still a bit better quality wise and experience wise to take it from an analog source into digital than digital to digital. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you know what we've done a few times. We didn't do this with all the Taxpayers records, but we did this with I know we did it with the Rhythm in the Cages and some of the songs on the Henry Turner record is we recorded it and then we ran it back through some tape so that
Oh,
even if
that's
you listen
cool.
to it on digital, you'd still get a tape quality to it.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, because most people are going to be listening to it on their phones or on the computer or something like that. And if you want to have that sound, I think the closest way to do it is to take that recording, and then what you can do is you just yeah you literally like hook it up to some big reel to reel tape, and you run it through that, and then it gives that nice fuzz to it.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Ah, that's so cool that you do that. I didn't know that. Um,
Yeah, we didn't do it for every song. I think the reason we did it for some of the songs on God Forgive These Bastards was it was like we wanted the fuzzy tape ones to be more Henry Turner thinking back to something that happened in the past, and so
okay,
giving
so yeah,
those the kind of tape sounds, and then present era ones we didn't run through tape so that it was
so
just a nice
things like
clean sound.
God damn these hands of mine
Yeah, yeah,
is
would have been run through a tape. Yeah,
that's
yeah,
awesome. That's actually a
yeah.
good idea because that kind of gives it that almost throwback, but almost really visceral vibe that those songs are meant to have in the
Yeah,
undertone.
kind of a vintage quality to it, you know. Kind of take you back in aesthetically. It kind of it brings you
Yeah,
into into the past a little bit more than something that's like really crystal clear sounding.
yeah. And
So,
it's funny because I had, like I said, I had Jesse and Veronica on from Escape from the Zoo and Days yesterday,
oh,
and
cool. How are they doing?
they're good. It was my
Cool,
first meeting with them, and they're very nice. I'm going to go see them in March up in Buffalo at the Rec Room.
cool.
Um, and I mentioned I had you on today, and they're like, "That's really cool." And I mentioned folk punk, and I said how you guys are kind of falling under that, and the taxpayers have. And they said, "Well, that's because nobody knows what the fuck to call the taxpayers." I'm like, "Well, you're right, because they're really a punk
Yeah,
band at heart, but they got the jazz and the country and the blues thing going."
yeah,
When I first heard
yeah. It is.
I loved you
Yeah,
like an alcoholic, I showed that to my wife. I said, "Babe, you are gonna love this band as much as I do." And she's
yeah,
like, "I really do." And I show
yeah.
her everything else, and she likes the punk stuff, but she's really into jazz and stuff like that.
Right.
And
Yeah,
so it's like combining those two things for her was brilliant. And I
yeah.
just, from there, I got the book and the tape because I'm like, I need to get this. Because I understood what the tape was about, and
Right.
I wanted the physical product, but that was my introduction to you. But for me, it's a toss
Cool.
up between that and Two Risks. Um, that
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
never heard a
It's
band
interesting.
swing like you guys do.
Oh, cool. Thanks. Yeah, yeah.
Like,
I like jazz a lot too. I wish that I was I wish I was a bit more competent of a jazz player. Like I listen to a lot of jazz, and sometimes I just marvel at what some of these cats can do. Like I listen to a lot of a lot of bebop stuff
yeah,
from like the
I
'50s and
find I
stuff,
like a
and I'm
lot of
like, how the hell did they play that, man? That's so cool. How they do
I
that?
well, because a lot of it was improv too. So I
Yeah,
mean that, and being a Grateful Dead fan too, it was bizarre
yeah,
to me why it took me a while to really catch on to jazz until I saw someone actually like playing it. I'm like,
yeah,
oh, there's the Black Sabbath
yeah.
rat salad thing. And okay, it just literally connected the dots.
You got to be in the right place for certain things. You got to be in the right place, either frame of mind or
And I
time
was
in your life to be able to access it. I never liked jazz when I was a kid.
I
I didn't
always
get
said
it.
it made
I
me
didn't get it.
nervous, and now it calms me. I
Yeah,
love Home Cooking by Jimmy Smith. That's one
yeah,
of my favorite records right
yeah.
now. You know,
It's so funny how like it's almost like certain objects are just they're waiting for you for the right time. They're like, I'll be here. I'll be here waiting for you.
it's
You're
funny
not
you
ready yet.
mentioned that because a man that my mom dated years ago when I was a kid gave me a bunch of his old records because he knew that I was into record collecting and I liked a lot of stuff. My mom was really weirded out when she caught me listening to Elvis one day and Iron Maiden the next. And I was like
Yeah,
8 years old, you know.
yeah.
But he gave me a record that I was intrigued by it. I had no idea why. And I kept it for years. And I
Hmm.
didn't get it until maybe 4 years ago. It was
What was it?
Nighthawks at the Diner by Tom Waits.
Oh, that's a good record.
And
Yeah, that's a
as a
good one.
14-year-old kid, I couldn't get into anything that wasn't because I was angry at the world, we all are.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
for some reason, I tried to listen to it and I'm just like, I'm just not my attention span, I couldn't get it.
Right,
Years
right.
later, when I
It's
pulled it out and I listened to it after listening to Dylan and the Dead,
yeah.
and understanding loving the way Dylan wrote. And I'm like, this is the Dylan of jazz, basically. Oh my
Yeah.
God. This is, it just blew my mind, you know.
Some people don't like the Tom Waits piano ballad stuff, but I
I
love it,
love it.
man. I love it. I think he's great.
I did a
I mean, he's
Christmas.
great at anything he does.
Oh yeah.
The guy stands on a world of his own in music. Like you definitely hear the influence of different things. Like you can hear the Captain Beefheart influence. You
Yeah.
can hear the Dylan influence. You can hear
The Jack
the
Kerouac and the beat.
jazz or the Kerouac. Yeah, he's a real beat guy. But
Yeah.
really, once he came into his own, and this was. I think he credits his wife, Catherine. I forget her last name. With she was the one that introduced him to Beefheart, and she was check this out, this is going to change, that's when he went off and just became like something nobody's ever heard of before,
Yeah.
when he started doing swordfish trombone and
Oh yeah.
you
I
know
did a
um,
Christmas show for Hard Rock Hell Radio because we were all allowed to do a
uh,
30-minute, Christmas show.
uh-huh.
And, I had so much different stuff, but the second to last song I played was Silent Night Christmas Card from a Hooker in Minneapolis, a live
Wow.
version, because the live version I love because it
Beautiful
affected
song.
me. Because
Yeah.
at first people were laughing when he did the first round of Silent Night, and they were kind of laughing, not in a way of like disrespect or finding what he's talking about funny. It's just what he's saying was so heavy. Sometimes people
Yeah,
have no other
gotta
response.
laugh.
They'll laugh, they'll cry, whatever. But at the end, when he goes back through Silent Night after, he says, I'll be ready, released for parole by Valentine's Day. It's silent
Valentine's
as a,
Day.
and then he goes back into Silent Night. It's so goddamn quiet. You could hear a pin drop, and it's
I
just,
have not heard this. Will you send me a link
I
to
will
it?
send you the link to this particular
That
performance because it's
sounds
video,
awesome.
but I did it the YouTube to MP3 conversion to play
Mm.
this version because it's just when even just hearing it, you can hear the laughter and how at the end.
I can imagine marrying those two. That's a what a brilliant idea. Silent Night and Christmas Card from a Hooker in
You did
Minneapolis.
that, and then the last song I played was the Pogues Fairy Tale from New York because.
Another heartbreaker. Another
But I
heartbreaker. I
felt
love
those
that
two
song.
back to back would be a great send off for Christmas. I wanted to do it,
Yeah.
but yeah,
What is your radio show? Is it what's the station that it's on?
Hard Rock Hell Radio. It's based out of England. I'm the only Yank with a bunch of British guys,
Ah,
girls. It's
okay. And
I
is it digital or is it played on like a land station in England?
It is digital. It's online,
Yeah,
so you do have an app.
cool,
I pre-record. I actually play you guys quite a bit. Um,
cool.
and it's live every Monday morning, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. UK time. In my time zone, that's 5 to 7 a.m. So I'm still at work while I'm live on the
Oh, okay.
radio.
I was gonna say I'm gonna listen to it, but man, there's no way I'm
I
waking
do
up for
have
that.
it
I'll listen
all
to
my
some old versions of the show. I don't think I'll be able to listen to it live.
That's okay. I have a SoundCloud link I can send you where I actually put them public on SoundCloud every single show after they air.
Nice.
So you can
Well, I'm
literally,
excited to have a listen.
yeah, I'd be honored. And you get to hear it without
Yeah.
commercials. But it's funny because, like, I've listened to it sometimes just to hear what I sound like, and I don't like my own voice at all. But I like the
Hmm.
music I play. So I'll turn down the volume at my voice and then turn it back up when the music plays because I'm that self-conscious. But
We all are.
yeah, it seems to be that way. And those who aren't, there's usually something wrong with them, like the actors who like to watch the movies they've been in with company they have over, they're never talked about nicely. But it'll be funny to hear me talking and then the commercials are English, like because they're
Ah,
British. It'll be like, it's interesting to hear,
yeah.
that, you know,
I love little local commercials. So I hate commercials in general, especially like the corporate, fucking Geico, that kind of stuff.
yeah,
But little local shops advertising on local media, Love that kind of stuff. We've got
right?
this little movie theater. It's called the Riverview Theater, and it's just this like single screen place. It was built in the 50s, and what they do before showings is they'll do advertisements on the screen from just different local businesses, like the local taekwondo studio, the local record shop, the
Oh,
local
that's
ice cream
cool.
shop, and stuff like that. And people like make up their own little advertisements. Sometimes they'll do little make their own jingles and things like that. And it's its own art form. I
Yeah,
feel,
absolutely. And I think
there's a
it
soul
takes,
to it.
yeah, well, back when they used to make commercials like that, that's what it was for, the mom and pop
Yeah,
shops.
yeah,
So it's kind of taken us back to what things were supposed to be in a way
yeah.
before they got perverted in a way.
Right. But then if I'm like I'm watching YouTube and an advertisement comes up for I don't know, Citibank or
Yeah,
Geico, then my soul dies a little bit
right.
inside.
Especially when it's like one of your videos or like, a crass
Yeah.
video or something. It's like, oh,
Uh,
this is
yeah,
crushing.
they did this new thing where even if you opt out of monetization on YouTube,
They'll
they
still,
still are allowed to do advertisements now. You used to be able to opt out of it, so
yeah.
that if you wanted out of it, you could do that. But now it doesn't matter. Even yeah, like you say, even a crass video will have a Geico. Ugh.
Yeah. And it's just like, if you only knew the fucking irony here and how much this
Yeah,
hurts me,
yeah, exactly, exactly.
you know. Um, so I mean, when you were writing for the taxpayers,
Hmm.
obviously you could call it political, and I think sometimes that's, you could say that, but I view a lot of what you do as more of the sociological effect. And I said this with Jesse and Veronica too. My take from it is more of what affects the political decisions that are made have the effects on the people. I think that's a more fair way to say it. Was this all things that you were, just thriving influence from lyrically? Was this your, you know,
Yeah. I don't know. It's a good question. I think like in some ways there are conscious choices that you make when you're writing, when you're working on anything creative. Um, but plenty of it happens subconsciously. Like
yeah,
plenty of it happens just you're perceiving the world through the lens that you're given, and it comes out in certain ways. So like, well, I could be dishonest and tell you that X song is about the Ukrainian invasion
yeah.
or the Russian invasion of Ukraine from the perspective of the blah blah blah. Really, ultimately, it's almost like you're operating on this subconscious level, and then sometimes you'll go back. You'll like at least this is how I write. Sometimes I'll put something down, and it's based it's based on sometimes it'll be on a current event, or its influence on some fictional character, or on some nonfiction character,
Okay.
myself in some cases. But then I'll go back, and if I work on it for the course of like a couple of weeks or a couple months, uh, then I'll kind of form it to fit a certain thing. But
Okay.
really, the best ones, my favorite songs, are the ones that kind of come out from a subconscious perspective. They just kind of
Yes.
they come out, and
You
then
could
I'm like,
tell that
oh,
that's my
I wonder
poetry.
what that was about. And then I analyze it afterwards, and people will tell me what it's about, and they'll say, "This what this is about, this, right?" And I'll say, "Yeah, sure, yeah." I think it's almost like, and that's not to diminish it.
Oh no.
What I mean when I say that is that like I don't like there is an intentionality behind songwriting. Definitely, like when I'm writing songs, there's an intentionality behind it. But I think how
Yeah.
consciousness works is so mysterious, and it's so mysterious how it is that we perceive the world, that I don't think we're always aware why it is that we use certain symbols to represent certain things. Like the reason that we have poetry and we have art and we have paintings and things like that is because we don't have the words to express certain ideas or certain reductions that we have about the world around us, and
Absolutely.
therefore it comes out in weird metaphors,
Yes.
and you can't always exactly like pinpoint what that metaphor exactly is. Like what it means on a spiritual level. You
Yeah.
know what it means in
You
your
could feel
heart.
it even if,
Yeah, but you can't articulate it always.
yes.
Sometimes you struggle to articulate exactly to a T what it is. You can color around it, but you can't exactly nail
I
it in for exactly
Have
what
you
it
ever
is.
had an instance? Have you ever written a song that was kind of personal to you, but it was that subconscious where it just came from nothing, like a stream of consciousness? That's how all of my
Yeah,
best stuff, my poetry, everything.
hundred
Have you
percent.
ever learned
Yeah.
something about yourself or a
Oh yeah.
situation you were involved in that you didn't even think about or fathom or wasn't even a reality at the time, but it's reflected in your lyrics?
100%. Yeah, hundred
And
percent.
I
Yeah.
swear I did that once and I had a breakup a few months after. And when I read back the lyrics I wrote that my intention was to write a dark love song, I'm like, oh my God, this is a clear example of loving someone who won't love you back no matter what you do.
Yeah,
It just,
if I'm honest, I think that probably that's the reason a lot of us do make art in general, is to process our own shit, even if we're not intentionally
aware of it.
doing that. It's
Yeah.
yeah, we're not always aware of the fact that we're doing it, but like uh, I do this thing. It's called I do this. It's called the Song of the Week Club, where it's like a Patreon thing that I do, where I upload a song every week, and I started doing that because I was like compulsively writing all these songs. They wouldn't end up on anything, but I just compulsively do it, and I was like, why do I have this need, this compulsion to just bleh, like
Yeah.
just do it constantly, like I can't stop myself, um, and uh, and I think that the reason for that is because it's a way of processing the world. It's almost like a journal,
Yeah.
like some people have journals, and how I process the world around me is I try to um, like structure it into a song that like makes sense in its own way. Like it doesn't make sense necessarily with specific like with literal context to what's going on with me, but in
Yeah.
that general sense that we're talking about, where it's like it's couched in metaphor and stuff, and
But
you're not always even aware of why. But it helps you process it, and then as you say, you look back upon it later, and you're like, oh, that's why I wrote that. I,
yeah.
I was I was struggling with this thing. I needed to process it, and now I've learned from that as a result,
Yeah,
and I didn't even
exactly.
realize it at the time.
It's just insane. And it's
Yeah,
funny because what the way you're describing what you do is exactly how I did my poetry.
yeah.
I
What, like the spoken word stuff
Yeah,
that you
the
did, that
poetry
we were
writing.
talking about,
Yeah,
right?
that we were talking about. I literally
Yeah,
it was stream of conscious, and I tell everybody if you don't get it or you don't understand it, you have to understand I'm blending reality with the surreal.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Is that
Yeah,
kind of a
yeah.
good way to
And you
put it?
just don't even know exactly why it is you're doing what you're doing until it's after the fact.
It,
In a
it,
lot of cases.
yeah, it's like it's almost as if we tap it for me. It's almost as if I tap into my higher self or tap into
Yeah.
some cosmic being that speaks through me. Because those are
Yes.
all done in like a 4 hour period. Just,
Yes. No, yes, absolutely.
great
I
stuff.
think a lot about like the last couple of years I've been reading a lot and thinking a lot about consciousness, where it comes from,
Yeah.
and there's this really interesting idea that has a lot of scientific support in the last couple of years about consciousness. It used to be, when we would study where consciousness comes from, people would be like, okay, it's generated from the brain. The brain creates consciousness, and each individual has their own consciousness. But now there seems to be a lot of evidence to support the fact that that is not the case, that actually how consciousness works is the brain is almost more of an antenna, and it is receiving information that is all around us, and that this consciousness that we think of as being this individualized thing is in fact just our own way of interpreting something that is around us. And
Yeah.
so like sometimes when I'm writing or working on songs, I think about it like that. If I'm really in touch with the antenna, I'm receiving it in a more clear way. It's almost like when you're tuning a radio and
Yeah.
it's kind of staticky, you can't really hear it, but then sometimes you get it just at the right position, comes in crystal clear. Those are the songs that seem to like hit for me the best are the ones
Yeah.
that come in crystal clear, and it's almost like my antenna is tuned just right.
Yeah.
But the cool
You,
thing about that is it takes some of the ego away from
yeah.
it. You know, like
Because it's
it's like
like,
it's
no,
not
I
about
had,
you, it's about the world instead.
yeah. But it's also like when people are like, oh my God, that song's a freaking masterpiece. What was your thought process when you were writing
Yeah.
it?
You're
I don't
like
know.
it's not me. It's not me.
Yeah.
It's something else.
And
It's everyone.
when people try to make it like, if someone would try to even build your ego up, you're just like, I don't know. I wrote it in 5 minutes.
Right.
You
It's an
know, like,
interesting like thought, isn't it, to think that we're just interpreting this universal
yeah.
consciousness
And
and
everybody's like, man, I wish I
uh,
could do that. How do you do it? I don't know.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah, it's
it kind of
fascinating to think
takes the
about.
ego out of it immediately.
Yeah.
Like, you think I'm great, but that's nothing.
R Right, and for me, like, it's almost like this morbid fascination with that is why I do it. Like,
Yeah.
you wanna kinda get in touch with whatever that is. It's so mysterious that
Yeah.
you wanna convene with it a little bit in the same
I
way that you
find
would
it
wanna convene with
frustrating that I
anything.
can't turn my antenna on and off myself. It
Yeah.
acts on its own accord.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true. You can also kind of, you can with practice you can kind of fine tune it a little bit. Like I've gotten to the point where if you would ask me 10 years ago if like I had any control over it whatsoever, I said absolutely not. But now that like I do it every single night, there are certain like things that you can be aware of where you're uh, like for example sometimes it's as simple as clearing your head.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too woo with it necessarily, but like I mean, what some people call meditating, other people just call sitting in silence with your thoughts for a while.
Yeah.
And sometimes if I do that before I sit down to write for a couple minutes, I just sit there, close my eyes, and just chill out for a second and just like process or not process, just sit with just nothingness for a while. Turn off the damn phone, turn off the damn internet for a while and just 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 sit with some quiet for a while, it becomes a little easier to kind of uh, communicate with whatever it is that helps make those things.
You
Um,
may be onto
yeah,
something that, you know, I may have known in some way, but never put the two together. I
it's
was the only one
interesting.
awake on, one of my nights off, and I was just in the bathtub chilling and just listening to the silence. And next thing you know, I'm getting out of the tub to grab a pen and pad of paper to start working on
Right.
poetry. And it just all came in one, like I said, 4 hour session. I
Hmm.
literally finish one and sit there and, do something else for a little bit. And then something else would just come right in and boom, there was no, it was like each word in each
It's like
sentence.
you kind of
Already,
turn on a button and then it comes flooding out.
yeah,
Um,
it's like once I get
yeah.
that one good one going, I opened the floodgates and had a lot more to say, apparently.
You know what another good thing is for me for turning on the antenna is a repetitive exercise of some sort, and I mean that like a physiological exercise. Like for example, when
I've
I'm on
written
my
some poems
bike,
at work too.
uh, yeah, like when I get my heart rate up
Yeah,
and like if I'm like pumping the pedals on my bike or if I'm walking at a kind of a higher pace or when I've done different types of exercise like I swim sometimes if I swim laps.
yeah.
Sometimes the act of doing this repetitive exercise will kind of get me into a point where I'm like, I gotta write a song right now. I gotta go write a song.
I've written
And
poetry in
yeah.
between stacking boxes at work. Like, I'll write a sentence and I'll keep the next sentence in my head, stack the box, do
Hmm.
that real quick. I've actually, it's crazy how I've had that experience and thought it was weird, but it's funny because now you're saying you do that and it works for
Hmm.
you. I may have just unlocked some secrets for me without trying.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think, yeah, I mean generally it's a hard thing to control, but like
Yeah.
there is, I think there are some little tricks here and there to kind
It's
of
not
make it come a
necessarily I
little
want
more
to
easily.
control it. It's that I wish I could tap
Yeah.
into that easier
Yeah.
than having to sit here and wait and then boom, because
You
that's
know,
how it's
another
always.
thing is just being in touch with yourself. Like sometimes I'll sit down to write and I'll be like, this is not going to happen right now. I'm just like
Yeah.
I'm already like aware that
Yeah. But you do
it's
it
not going to
anyway.
work. You do it
So
anyway, and usually it doesn't work very well.
I'm
But
rewriting my
sometimes it does.
second volume of poetry completely because of that. Because I wanted to
Yeah.
write, but I couldn't. And it just doesn't feel me to me. You know what I mean? It doesn't
Yeah.
feel of quality.
You still got to do it. Like you still got to try to write even when you don't want to, but ultimately you kind of know when it's going to hit and when it's not going to hit. You can kind of
Exactly.
feel, you know.
You know it when you're trying too hard in a way, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing to think about, but
Yeah.
I don't know. Well,
I
look,
thank you.
it's midnight where I'm at, so I should let you go so I can go say goodnight to Elise before because she's actually an early riser, and if she's
Oh,
still
okay.
awake, I'm gonna go say goodnight to her. But I had fun talking to you, man. This has been
Yeah,
fun.
I definitely did too. Um, are there any before you go, is there anything new
Yeah.
coming with the taxpayers coming up? I know we kind of shied away from the music a bit, but it's a
Mm,
nice change in step.
yeah, we have talked about doing some more records on a regular basis. We all live in every single taxpayer lives in a different state now, and so it's really hard to to make it happen. And there's like a few personal like things that like I like there are, so the taxpayers are to me are kind of like this very holy group
Yeah.
in a friendship way to me, in that I want to, when we make the next record, which we're definitely gonna make another record for sure,
Yeah.
but like before we do that there are some like I need to get my head in the right place to do it. I guess
Yes.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like because I want to give proper due to all of the other people in that. Like I want to make sure that I'm giving my best to them. And so
Yeah,
that's a
you're
long way of me
110.
saying like I'm kind of working on myself, I guess, to a point where to where we can get together and we talk about it kind of actively, and we have a lot of ideas for what we want to work on next. Um, we'll see when it actually comes to fruition. In fact, I just wrote this song this past week that I'm thinking about approaching them to maybe talk about doing a thing with. There's nothing that's currently in the pipeline,
Okay.
but we do actively talk about stuff. Now, whether or not there's ever going to be a tour again, who knows? I kind of feel like we've always just recorded stuff more than we've actively toured and played shows, but that might
If you
happen
do,
at
I'd
some
love to
point in the
see you
future.
guys live.
Yeah, yeah, it'll probably happen at some point. I like what we always said is we were like, we're not gonna, we're never gonna quit. We're gonna do what Fugazi does, which is they don't break up. They just make a record every 10 years. so so we're just gonna do what Fugazi does and
Well,
maybe make a
when you're
record every now and then.
underground and you don't have the commercial record companies barking at your throat every 6 months, you can do stuff like that and make quality
Yeah.
work.
No one's forcing us to do anything, which is nice. And we can just kind of get together when the time is right.
Yeah.
I am working on I'm working on a couple of new projects. I have a sci-fi themed band with my
Oh,
friends
cool.
in Minnesota here, and we do it's called Temporal Riff. It's a
Oh,
Star Trek reference. And
yeah.
so we do it's like kind of a doom metal sci-fi type of thing.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
yeah, so that's what I've been doing with it as far as like just playing with other people goes recently. I I make Anxiety Cat songs on the regular that I release, and Anxiety Cat is like personal like project that is kind of like a solo thing.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and so I work on that pretty regularly. But so those are the main things. We also did like a Trusty Snakes record, which was a country band that me and a couple of the Taxpayers got together and made.
That is so
And we've been
cool.
talking about doing a Trusty Snakes record at some point again in the future. We did one album that's called New American Frontier, and that was like it came out a couple years ago, and we've been talking about maybe doing that again at some point. So, but as far as like just regular music goes, the main thing that I do is the Song of the Week Club, which is it's like patreon.com/song of the week club. And so, like half the songs I just make publicly available, and then the other half are just like private for people that are subscribers to it. But
Yeah.
yeah, like I do that every week or more than every week. So those are the main like creative things for music that I got going right now. So
That's awesome.
yeah,
It's nice to know that you do all these different things, but it's still on your radar no matter what. And that's probably going to be
yeah.
comforting to a lot of fans. One last question that I ask every guest, and there's no right or wrong answer, but it's a doozy, it seems.
All right,
Today,
lay it on me. What do you got?
what is it at the end of the day that you love about music enough to keep doing it?
Well, um, so there are very few things in life that um, communicate beyond language and communicate beyond geographic region that can provide hope and provide guidance in times of crisis, quite like music can. Like when I was a kid, whenever I struggled with anything, it was a lifeline for me. And as an adult, whenever I struggle with something, it becomes a lifeline for me. When I was a kid, it was listening to other people's music that helped me to survive. And as an adult, what helps me to survive is making it and processing, kind of like what we were talking about before. And so it feels like with humanity being such a base dark thing so much of the time, like what we were talking about earlier with the cycle of violence that seems to happen,
And it's never end.
and it seems so never ending that like it's almost like when you want to reach for something that is beyond the most the base dark animalistic parts of humanity, and you want to be in touch with something that is is just like I don't know how to say it other than like spiritual in
Yeah.
nature. It's one of the few things, it's one of the few ways we have to convene with God, whatever you want God to
Yeah.
be, like, people have different conceptions of what that might entail, from nothing to everything, and
Yeah.
from the self to something beyond the self, and it's like one of our few ways of convening with God, and that's
Yeah.
why I do it is because it's just it's almost a connection to another plane of existence to make it
That's
more.
basically what Paul
Yeah,
Stanley said in his book too, is that
yeah,
people raise their hands in church to reach something higher than themselves, and
yeah,
people do that at concerts for the same reasons.
yeah,
I thought that was pretty profound, and yeah,
yeah. It can speak to us individually, and it can also create a communal
mhm,
shared experience as well.
exactly.
Yeah,
And there's not a lot of things in this world that could do that, like music.
yeah. Yeah, it's something that I think people have been sorely missing during the pandemic is the closeness of an experience like that.
It's definitely
Yeah,
shown, I think, in the way music's kind of had an uptick lately, it seems.
yeah, Yeah. People do need to feel as though they are convening with something larger
Yeah.
than the day-to-day existence, and need to feel as though they're communicating with another person on a more heartfelt level than
Yeah. Just a simple
everything
comfort
else.
of knowing someone that feels how you do,
Yeah.
not just
Yeah.
you, can be enough to get anyone through the shittiest days. So,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's why I do it, and that's why I think a lot of people love music in general. Um,
and we
yeah,
thank you for what you do.
yeah. Oh, likewise, and I thank just everyone who does these things
Oh, yeah.
for for just the nourishing of things beyond you know war and just feeding yourself day to day. Just people that want to nourish the value that is beyond the physical.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, it has been an absolute honor. I won't want to keep you too long. I feel like you and I are the kind of people that could sit for
Yeah, we'll
hours.
keep we,
And
we, we keep talking forever, but yeah, I gotta say goodnight to Elise, but we could be here for 4 more hours, I think.
oh, yeah,
We'll do it
that's
again. How
not a
about
bad
that?
thing. We could do this again sometime.
Yeah. Let's check in again in the future.
Absolutely. Until next time, guys, if you like what I'm doing here, click the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment for Rob. I'm sure he'll be around. I'm Andy
I'll check
Thunders,
it out.
and that's Rob from the Taxpayers, everybody. Thank you very much. Have a good one. Peace, love, rock and roll.